Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Saints Insider Podcast. I'm Zach Ewing. We're here in our new New Orleans studio. Luke Johnson, Rod Walker, Jeff Duncan with me on this Friday, September the 15th, and these are our new digs, so hope you like them. Hope we can get you to tune in a couple times a week here from our studio, and we'll be talking some Saints. Today, of course, that means Saints versus Panthers, full preview coming. We've got analysis, we've got breakdown, and we've got predictions for you at the end of the show. Saints Insider podcasts are brought to you by Bank Plus, and away we go, guys. We got Monday Night Football this week. We got Saints. We got Panthers. We're going to do some picks at the end, but let's break this thing down. Luke, first of all, we just got the Saints' second injury report of the week. They'll have the final one tomorrow on Saturday, but looking pretty good. I mean, this team is as healthy as you could expect a team to look during an NFL season.
Yeah, I don't think we should be holding on to any idea that it's going to be looking like this throughout the course of the season. But week 2, got to feel pretty good about where you're at. Obviously, the Peyton Turner thing happened. He went on IR. But when you think about what they have going on this injury report right now, Kendre Miller looks pretty promising to make his debut this week. And really no other big stars are on this where you're really worried about their status for Monday night's game. So, I mean, it could be a whole heck of a lot worse. I think they're feeling pretty good about where they're at.
Yeah, and we broke down Kendre Miller back at practice, Jeff. The running game was not a bright spot last week. Part of that could be Titans' running defense. Part of it could be the Saints' offensive line woes. Could just be game planning. Now that they have a little more depth back there, do you expect them to try to run the ball more this week?
Well, look, I think they knew last week they weren't going to be that successful, but they still needed to try and maintain some kind of balance and keep the Titans honest. But I think they were happy with what they got out of the running game. They knew that the game plan was basically going to be based on Derek Carr and that passing attack, and I think it's going to be that way again this week, especially with J.C. Horn out. And then we'll probably talk about that. You know, Luke's talking about injuries. Just think if you're the Carolina Panthers and you've lost your number one corner, getting ready to go against this receiving corps. So Saints much better shape there. But as far as the running game is concerned, I don't think Kendre Miller changes the dynamic in their running game. I really don't. I think they're going to go with Jamal Williams, try to run against that front seven, but they're really stout up front. A lot of first-round draft picks on that Carolina defense. So I think it's going to be tough sledding again this week.
And then, Rod, on the other side of the ball, Carolina's down, I think, both starting guards. Saints' defensive front got to be kind of licking its chops a little bit.
Yeah, and, they're playing a rookie quarterback. I think they'll definitely try to make it as uncomfortable as they can for him. And I think that, they were able to do that last week against Ryan Tannehill. I think if they can do the exact same thing, I think you can see some of those same Saints could force some turnovers and do some of the things that they were able to do last week against the Titans.
Yeah, and we talked to Joe Woods about that today, Saints defensive coordinator. The pass rush and the secondary are, they're two parts of the same coin, right? They're all working together. Mm-hmm. They had 10 quarterback hits last week, 3 sacks, and I don't think it's a coincidence that they had 5 opportunities to make interceptions, and they actually picked off 3 of them. This was like such a weakness for them last year, was developing that pass rush with their front 4 especially, and I think we saw that last week. Obviously, Tennessee had the kind of new offensive line. You didn't really know a lot about it, but if they can continue to get that pressure with that front 4, I think we can see more of those types of splash plays in the back end.
And Bryce Young threw 2 picks last week for Carolina against the Falcons. So, I don't think he played a bad game necessarily for his first game, but clearly is going to make some rookie mistakes, is going to have that problem. So we'll break this down. We're going to start when the Saints have the ball, then we'll switch to when the Saints are on D. We'll hit special teams, we'll hit injuries, all those sorts of things, and then we'll make our predictions at the end. So when the Saints have the ball, guys, and we touched on it, Rod, with the running game, but what we've been talking about all week is this confidence and this newfound almost swagger in the downfield passing game. And without J.C. Horn, as Dunk mentioned, there's no reason not to expect that to continue.
Yeah, I think they'll be successful doing that. The big question mark, of course, is protecting Derek Carr. Carolina has some really good edge rushers, and, you look at guys like Derek Brown and Brian Burns. I mean, if they can protect Derek Carr, I think this team will be able to take a lot of big shots down the field. I think that's going to be a really big key of this game. So we'll be watching Trevor Penning just like we've been watching him since training camp started.
Is there any reason to think improving? I mean, is there going to be a moment that clicks? Is this just a gradual improvement we're looking for from Trevor Penning? I think Dennis Allen was asked about it yesterday, Luke.
Well, I think just from a personal standpoint, I mean, the guy was making his second NFL start last week. It was his 7th overall NFL game, and you got to remember the last time he was playing football, he's playing against FCS level competition where he was about 1.5 feet taller than everybody he was going up against. So I think we all understood that there was going to be, and Dunk, you pointed this out multiple times throughout training camp, that this was going to be a process for Trevor Penning, and it was not always going to be pretty. But I think you can see everything with the player. He's huge, he's athletic, he's smart, and he's willing. It's all the pieces are there. They've got to just get it all to kind of come together. So I think this is going to be something that is going to be ongoing, and there might be games where it looks like it clicks, and then he gets up against, maybe even this week, a guy like Brian Burns. I mean, if I was Carolina, they move Burns all over the field. If I were them, I'd be like, you're lining up right over the left tackle every play until they show they can stop it. So he's going to get a lot of that stuff. I think it's going to be time, and there's going to be times where it looks like it's working, and then you take a step back and try to take 2 steps forward after that.
And look, here's the other thing I'd say. It helps having James Hurst playing next to him. I mean, James Hurst is a veteran guy, really good mentor for him to have, and I think that's a big reason why he's starting right now. They want him to work with Penning and help him, and they're going to have to mix up some of their protections, use the tight end, sometimes use the back shaded to his side. They're smart in that way. I think they learned a lot in that first half last week, and I think they'll have a plan, and certainly Carolina saw it. There's no doubt. But he has all the tools. It's just a matter of can he put it together. Now, who knows? I mean, none of us know. It's like Luke said, it's his second game coming up in his NFL career for all intents and purposes. We'll see how this plays out, but, he's got the ability. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I mean, they keep going back to him, and you mentioned he's 1.5 feet taller than FCS guys. He's still bigger than almost everybody.
I mean, it's really hard. It's really hard to be on an NFL football team and have somebody like just stand out and be like, that guy's huge,
Yeah.
He's the tallest guy on the roster, and he's the heaviest guy on the roster, and he's like a freak athlete, and like it's not like he's the kind of guy who's just carrying a bunch of extra weight. It is like he is solidly put together. The analogy I always use for him is if like you're a Game of Thrones fan, he looks like the Mountain. Like he's a huge muscular person, and I mean, you see guys like that flame out, right? Like it happens. It's not like a guaranteed predictor of success if you're just this like huge bulky athlete, but like I just keep thinking that they've got smart offensive line coaches there who just over and over and over have just like told us like this guy has it. It's gonna be there. It's just gonna take him a while to get there.
And it looks like, I don't know if you all agree, but like it looks like he's just pressing a little bit, almost thinking too much. It's all gonna eventually come together for him. But right now, you can just see, he's just a work in progress, and his mind is churning. Even at left tackle, we tend to think, all he's got to do is just block. Well, no, there's a lot that goes into that, in trying to marry up his fundamentals with his pass sets, and these defensive ends and these pass rushers are ruthless, man, and they know it. So right now, it's almost like a feeding frenzy, I think, until he gets and shows that he can do this on a consistent level. He's going to have to rise to the challenge.
And with these younger guys, I mean, you always hear them talking about the game slowing down for him, and I think for him, it just hasn't slowed down for him yet, and I think eventually it will as the season goes along.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason they're going to keep going to him and not say, it was a bad half, we got to bench him. I know some people were saying that at halftime of the Titans game. You're not going to do that. Well, Luke would have done it.
I might have thrown a tweet out there.
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted it out as well.
It did get pretty bad. I mean, honestly, it did. But they were able to fix it. And then the other part of this equation, and Luke, you wrote about Chris Olave today. You're going to write about Rashid Shaheed this weekend. If you can give Derek Carr even a little bit of time, he now has these weapons that the Saints haven't had in a while. Michael Thomas, we get the bobblehead up there, like he's back. They've got some real potential for a downfield passing game here.
Yeah, and you didn't even bring up Juwan Johnson, who I think, even though he didn't have a big game the other day, I think he's still in line for a huge season. Mm-hmm. They have really. I was talking to James Hurst after the game, and I was asking him specifically just about the team trusting Derek Carr in that late in the fourth quarter game on the line, putting the ball in his hands and letting him throw downfield to Shaheed. And like his eyes just went wide after the game. He's like, I mean, I'm looking around the huddle and we've got, you know, Shaheed and Olave and Mike, and we're going to have Alvin, and we got Juwan, and you know, last year's NFL rushing touchdown champ. He's like, all we need to do is give him time. Because really, you saw what Shaheed can do. You know, I mean, he's got like elite, different level speed. It's the same sort of thing we were talking about with Trevor Penning, where you're a big dude standing out in the NFL. Like his speed stands out even among some of the world's best athletes. And you add to that they're finding ways to move these guys around and get them in space to where they can catch a ball. Chris Olave had twice as many yards after the catch in this game that he'd ever had in an NFL game. Granted, he only played 15 games as a rookie, but small sample size, really encouraging sample size. Mike Thomas going for 25 yards in the first play of the game. You know, we mentioned Alvin Kamara coming back in just 2 short weeks from now. Like they have potential to be really, really explosive this year on offense. It's up to Pete Carmichael to find ways to get those guys the ball.
Yeah, Chris Olave, Rod, like he had the look of that guy who, yeah, it's 3rd and 8, you need a big catch? Come to me. I'll figure out a way to get those 10 yards.
Yeah, you know, all last season we kind of looked at him as the second receiver behind. This is before Michael Thomas got hurt. We thought he was like, but this is kind of his team now. He's the wide receiver 1 in this locker room, and I think you're seeing it. And he talked. You could tell he was confident throughout the preseason. He wanted to get better, and he wants to be the best receiver in the league. And he looked like he's trending in that direction.
I'll tell you another thing, and no one's really talked about this. I think Taysom Hill referred to this early in the offseason about Derek Carr, and it might be worth pursuing as a story, but he seems to throw like a really catchable ball. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but like you don't see them drop any. I don't think they had any drops in the game. We haven't seen a ton of drops in camp. And I think there's something to that. You know, his ball just seems very catchable, and there's an art to that. I think Taysom was saying he knows when to zip it in there and when to put a little touch on it. And just watching the game again, I noticed, in addition to his accuracy, he just seems to have the right amount of spin on the ball and the right amount of torque on it. So you know, that's something that I think can be overlooked. But in that game, in addition to all the wild plays we're talking about, the big plays, the receivers did a good job of negotiating the sideline, which is a difficult thing to do. Olave is a master at that. Thomas on that first catch had to navigate the sideline, and also I think just showing hands and not dropping balls. I mean, we've seen that in the past. I mean, Tennessee had a huge drop in the game.
Yeah.
So I think it's another thing to hang your hat on if you're a Saints fan in this offensive attack, is that their passing attack, in addition to their quarterback, the receivers showing great ball security.
Ask the Kansas City Chiefs if drops matter, if receivers matter. I mean, my goodness. By the way, I had my one-on-one interview with Derek Carr, which you can check out on NOLA.com. He's never lost to Carolina. He's only played them twice in his career. But he did tell me this wild story about skateboarding down a hill in Charlotte when his brother played there in 2007, and how he ended up bloodied from like face to navel. So you got to check that out. Pretty crazy. But let's switch gears. You're watching the Saints Insider podcast on NOLA.com and the Saints on NOLA.com YouTube channel. Press the like button, subscribe for us. Do what you can to help us out. Leave a 5-star review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Zach Ewing, Luke Johnson, Rod Walker, and Jeff Duncan. Switching gears to when the Panthers have the ball Monday night. And a lot of this, Rod, is going to start with Bryce Young. It's his first home start. It's Monday Night Football. He was the #1 pick. The Panthers mortgaged a good bit of their future, some draft picks, giving up a good young receiver in DJ Moore to get this guy. What do they have in Bryce Young?
I think they have a quarterback who can extend plays, which, you know, that gives defenses trouble, obviously. And he's very accurate. I think, you know, you look at the game last week, Ryan Tannehill missed a couple of big plays that could have very well gone for touchdowns. I don't think Bryce Young will miss those plays. So I think the Saints are going to have to do a really good job of trying to contain him and, you know, keeping him in the pocket and not – and the DBs are obviously going to have to, you know, make sure they're on their game probably for a longer amount of time on each play.
And that brings to mind the pass rush. And, again, we talk about the guards being gone, Luke, for Carolina. And, frankly, that was a part of their game where they struggled against Atlanta. Bryce Young, whether it was by design or not, was having to get rid of the ball very quickly. So this Saints defensive line, a pretty encouraging performance against Tennessee, both against the run and the pass, and no reason not to expect they can't do that against Carolina.
Only one reason not to expect that, and that is that the Saints have, for whatever reason, just massively struggled against guys who can evade the rush in the pocket and move around and buy time with their legs. I don't think Bryce Young is like in the mold of, obviously Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson or whatever the case is. I think he's not going to kill him as a runner per se, but he's definitely a guy who can extend plays, and I think that frankly the Panthers are going to need that against the Saints because their receiving core has like no juice, and I think that's a huge advantage to the Saints to a degree. But if he's extending plays and running around in the backfield, letting guys have some time to get open, I think that could be a problem for the Saints. But the Falcons went up against them. The Falcons are basically a northern version of the Saints at this point defensively. They got Ryan Nielsen at DC. They got a bunch of Saints players over there on that defense, and they fared pretty well against them. So maybe the Saints can repeat that.
Look, the only hope I think the Panthers have is if the officiating crew calls it really tight. I think it's Jeff Novak as the referee. I thought Tolbert on Sunday let them play, and that plays to the Saints' advantage. We know how they played in the secondary. They're very handsy. They're very physical on the outside. They kind of let that go in that game, and I think that plays to the Saints' advantage. If they're allowed to play that way, I don't see how they're going to get open in the passing game. They're so limited, like Luke said, at receiver. There's just no one there that scares you in the passing game. So they're going to have to run the ball, protect Bryce Young, and I think try to do some trickery or something. We've seen that in the past. I can't remember what game it was. Remember when we were in Charlotte? I think they threw like a halfback pass, maybe Christian McCaffrey to Chris Manhertz or something. It was to the tight end. I mean, I think they're going to have to do something like that to get a lead and maybe put a little pressure on the Saints. Otherwise, I just can't see them consistently driving 75, 80 yards against this defense as good as it is and as limited as Carolina is.
Yeah, I didn't see Laviska Shenault going off for like a 70-yard touchdown against them last year either. So,
and he's a good player. I mean, I see them trying to get him involved. And, going back to what we were talking about earlier, there was a really good story in ESPN this week about how the deep ball is gone in college in the NFL because so many teams are playing two deep safeties, making you drive the field, almost begging you to run the ball and basically rolling the dice that you're eventually going to make a mistake, create a penalty, drop a ball or whatever. And so there's a premium now on people that can run, receivers that can run after the catch. The Deebo Samuels of the world. We're seeing the Saints try to do that more in their offense. Short passing game, get the ball in the hands of Rashid Shaheed, get the ball in the hands of Olave, which hasn't been traditionally a strength for him. But I think, the days of dropping back and throwing it 50 yards down the field like, Daryl LaMonica or something it's kind of out the window. Just you don't see that very often.
What a pull, Daryl LaMonica.
Dan Fouts might have. I would have taken Dan Fouts for an old, but yeah. Anyway, DJ Chark limited practice for the Panthers the last 2 days. I mean, I think he's probably their top receiver, which that right there tells you it's not a strong. Nothing against DJ Chark, but if he's your top guy, it's not that strong, not that deep of a receiving core, and he's limited. He didn't play last week. Seems to me like he's trending toward like a questionable tag for Monday night. So, Rod, I mean, you better have guys who create separation against this secondary, and it does not seem like the Panthers have that.
Yeah, this is a secondary that they play really physical, and that's been like one of their strengths. I mean, I know Jonathan Mingo's still there. He's a rookie who they drafted, who they think is going to be really good. But I just don't know if they have the weapons to match up with this Saints secondary, especially if it's the same Saints secondary that we saw, last week. And I think that's what we're going to see from the Saints. And
you, Rod, you're writing about this for this weekend, but the Saints haven't allowed 20 points in a game, and that's obviously not all defense because you got to avoid turnovers and special teams mistakes and things like that. But this is a defense that just makes you earn everything.
Yeah, you look at last week. I mean, the Titans had to settle for field goals every time they scored. So this is a defense that's going to make you work, and it's a credit to Joe Woods. He's able to keep what this defense had a season ago. They're able to be just as efficient as they were last season, and it gives teams trouble.
Let's pivot to special teams for a minute on Saints Insider Podcast. We're previewing Saints and Panthers Monday Night Football, 6:15 p.m. On ESPN. Luke, you talked to Blake Grupe for a few minutes yesterday. he just doesn't seem like he changes much. I mean, he's exactly what you want in a kicker. The guy nailed 3 field goals. He was instrumental in that victory, a 52-yarder, and he's just kind of like this, got this whatever attitude about it.
Yeah, this is a great thing about being on camera. Okay, so I'm gonna do a Blake Groupie impression. I went up to him and I was like, hey man, debut, big game. Were you feeling any nerves? He's like, had some butterflies before the game, but
Yeah, that's how
once I
he
got
is.
out there, I was fine. It's like, okay. I mean, I don't know. If I'm going out there, 70,000 people, I'm a rookie making my debut in the building where they just, traded the guy who's been here for 6 years and set the franchise accuracy record. I'd feel pretty nervous. I mean, maybe he was. Maybe it's just blowing it off. But I don't know. I think the guy has the exact trait that you want out of the specialist, and particularly out of the kicker, in that like the heart rate is like incredibly low, and there's not too much of this and this and this. It's just steady.
Seems like the kind of guy who could fall asleep on the sideline. Like
Yeah. Oh, well, and then you hear Darren Rizzi talking about him today, and he's just like, he knows that people are gonna see him and be like, "There's the little guy," and he's not gonna like deal with that or put up with it. He's gonna walk into a room with his chest stuck out and be like, "Yeah, this is how I look, but I'm gonna go out there and boot a 52-yard field goal with no problem." So I mean, honestly, I think it was really, really encouraging that he goes out there and he gets 4 chances and he converts all of them. He's responsible for 10 of their 16 points in that game, and that's a hell of a debut for a guy who they got rid of Will Lutz to keep him on the roster.
Who missed an extra point, by the way.
Missed an extra point and a field goal. I think the field goal was like a 54-yarder, but still, it's a really, really strong debut for him, and he looks like a good get for the
And
Saints.
what Rizzi said, he was jacked up, and his kickoffs kind of showed it. I mean, he was launching his kickoffs, but you couldn't see it in his demeanor at all. So but he did say he was jacked up on the sidelines, excited, but I think on the surface you couldn't tell.
So
One of the things I talked to him about before the first game, he talked about when he made that transition from Arkansas State to Notre Dame. That was the reason he did it. He wanted to kick on that big stage, and he said that really prepared him for this. So,
yeah, I mean,
one
college
game
football,
in, you got to be impressed.
college football these days has bigger crowd. Well, not just these days, but you actually play in front of bigger crowds in college than you do in the NFL. So I suppose that part of it he was prepared for. Another factor of special teams, Lynn Bowden was activated or taken off the practice squad onto the active roster. Are we going to see a change at return? I'll just leave this open to any of you guys. Rashid Shaheed obviously has a lot of offensive responsibilities. He did fumble the opening kickoff last week. Is that a possibility where we see more guys get a chance there?
I actually asked Rizzi about Bowden as a return guy, and he said that he does have the ability, but just from the answer I got from him, I think I'd be surprised if they made a change there. I think they think Shaheed has a chance to be just like an elite NFL returner, and maybe they'll take their chances with him playing there and risking losing an offensive weapon on that side of the ball, but they think he can be like a game-changing type of player there. So it would surprise me if Bowden ended up just taking over that role entirely.
Special teams, though, Dunk, really strong performance, I think. Outside of obviously you don't want to fumble the opening kickoff. That's as bad as you can start. But between that, the block punt by Zach Bond, who Luke talked to him about doing that in front of Steve Gleason, pretty good kick coverage, making the kicks, pretty good punts. I mean, that's what winning football teams do.
Well, if you look at just the second half of that game, I think the Saints' last 13 points were scored after either turnovers or the block punt, which kind of is like a takeaway. In a game like that, I mean, that's critical. The offense really didn't have to drive 80 yards. They were set up with a lot of short fields, and that's complementary football, and that's what Dennis Allen believes in. And I think it's going to be another game like that this week, man. I think it's going to be another low-scoring defensive battle. I think it's the only way Carolina can be in this game is if they keep the Saints in the teens, below 20. I don't think they can get into a shootout with them at all. So in a game like this, we'll see. It's going to be outdoors. I've covered a lot of games at this stadium in the past. It can get windy, which could affect the kicking game as well. And the return game was probably the only thing that seemed to be an area they need to improve. Aside from the fumble, I think they started a few drives inside their 25, and Dennis Allen was talking about that. But I don't have any concerns with Sheed. I mean, he's a special talent. as a return guy. I mean, if he gets a seam, he can take it to the house. So to me, it was a strength for this team. I think it's going to be a strength all season.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned keeping Carolina in the teens, or Carolina keeping the Saints in the teens. Let's do some predictions. We'll go from right to left here as we sit, and give us a key to the game and then your prediction, Luke.
I think the key to the game has got to be to keep Derek Carr upright. I think this is the one area where we've seen this team struggle against Carolina in recent years. It seems like whether it's Jameis Winston or whoever else the quarterback has been on their back a lot. If they can keep Derek Carr upright, I mean, I just have so much faith in those receivers against this Carolina secondary. After seeing that defensive performance in Week 1 from the Saints, I really have a lot of faith against their defense against Carolina's offense. So I'll give Carolina some points for hosting the game Monday night. A lot of emotions there with Bryce Young's first career start in that building, but I think it's going to be a pretty convincing win for the Saints. I'll go 27-20.
All right, my key to the game, penalties. Dunk, you mentioned it. If they're calling the game tight, the Saints secondary especially is going to have to be real careful about not giving up free yards, not giving up big plays on the penalties. If they can do that, I just don't see any way Carolina consistently moves the ball on this team. And so I go with a similar margin as Luke. Saints may have to work for their points. They may have a few drives stall with sacks and things like that. But I go 19-13 Saints, kind of a tight game like last week, and they get it done. Rod?
I think the defense is going to dominate this game like they've done the last 9 games. They haven't allowed anybody to score over 20 points in 9 games in a row. And I just think that's going to continue. I think containing Bryce is going to be the key to this game. They can't give up the big plays, though. I mentioned the ones from last week that could have been big plays that weren't. I think that's the only way that Carolina can actually score on this team is if, a coverage breakdown or something like that. But I don't see them just driving up and down the field against the Saints. So I think I had it like 20-6 maybe.
20-6, dominating defensive victory. So we're all going to pick the Saints, right, Tom?
No, we're not. See, I'm going to be a little different here. Look, I think they're still going to hold another opponent under 20, and I think they're still going to lose because I think the one thing that concerns me, last week we saw Derek Carr throw a pick. We saw another play that could have been a touchdown and go the other way, got overturned or upheld by the officiating. It was a very close call. That's what worries me is a defensive touchdown in that environment. Luke mentioned it's going to be amped. It's their home opener. It's Bryce Young's debut. It's primetime game. I've just covered so many games in that environment where the Saints are the better team and they come out of there with a loss. It happens all the time, especially with a desperate team that lost their opener. I mean, they're going to be the more desperate team. It's just human nature. So crazy things happen for some reason in Charlotte. So I picked the Saints 17-16 against the red zone.
You picked the Panthers.
Panthers 17-16. Thank you. And I think the red zone is going to be the key. I mean, we saw last week it was a problem for the Saints offensively. It's historically been a problem for Derek Carr. And I think if they can't score touchdowns and they have to settle for field goals, that could come back to bite them.
We'll close with this. And I mean, I do think, obviously, starting 1-0 is important. This is a big spot in the schedule, though. 4 of their next 5 games are on the road. I mean, Rod, you were the only one who picked against the Saints last week. We only have one this week. But I guarantee you next week probably more than one of us are going to pick the Packers against the Saints. It's a tough spot. It's a short week. It's another road trip. It's just all of these schedule things in the NFL that are going against the Saints next week. And then they come back home for the Bucs, and they have 2 more road games, Boston and Houston, back-to-back weeks. So you want to take care of this game where you're ostensibly the better team before things can snowball on you. You kind of stop that before it starts.
And historically, the Saints haven't done well in week 2. They haven't been 2-0 since 2013. Yep. They've won, 5 straight openers now?
Yes.
But it's the second game that always gives them fits for whatever reason. So starting off 2-0 would be really huge for this team, especially when you look at the rest of that schedule.
And didn't you trot out some stat about second week or the teams that
1-0 teams win 65% of the time against 0-1 teams, and it's even higher than that when they're at home. So it's a tough spot. It's a tricky spot, but I mean, it's a game the Saints should probably win on paper.
Yeah, I mean, I like how Jeff you point out there's a very narrow path for Carolina to take here, and then you're like they're going to take it.
They're going to take it. Yeah,
it's what happens. It's what happens.
Yes,
all the time. How many times? What happened last year?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Saints lost. Right?
Right.
We saw them in 2021 blow out the Packers, who I think were
Exactly.
a lot of people's Super Bowl favorites going into that year. They beat them by 35 points, and then they go and get just manhandled in Carolina the next week. Like, this sort of thing happens. I just don't think it's going to happen this time. Maybe I'm wrong. But it is really important because, it's a division game. They went 2-4 in the division last year, and it's the whole reason they were irrelevant in Week 18. Because they were winnable games that they just did not come through in, and that's the most important thing is
Right.
taking care of the division. So this is a huge game for that reason. And then when you consider 2 of their next 3 are against probably the 2 toughest opponents they'll have in the first half of the season, maybe with the Jaguars being the exception, and they're both on the road.
New England.
In New England and Green Bay. I mean, they gotta take care of business this week if they want to finish where they expect to finish.
Saints will either be 2-0 and have some pretty good margin for error over the next few weeks, or they'll be 1-1, and that finger will start to hover over the panic button for Who Dat Nation. So that
It's always there.
one or the other. It's always within reach, right? But it'll start. They'll take the cover off of that panic button if they lose this game again in Carolina. So we'll be there Monday night. We'll have live post-game show, Saints Insider. Check that out 15 minutes after the game. Rod and Luke will be there with me, and we'll from Bank of America Stadium, and we'll talk to you. I guess not too late. Game will be over around 9:15, 9:30 New Orleans time. So not too bad, and we'll go live 15 minutes after that. So check that out on this same Saints on NOLA.com YouTube channel. We appreciate you all for tuning in. Check us out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave us a review and hit the like button and subscribe to the Saints on NOLA.com YouTube channel. For Luke Johnson, Rod Walker, and Jeff Duncan, I'm Zach Ewing. Thanks for watching the Saints Insider Podcast.